Good morning. I'm Michael Krantz. I'm the Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Development for Metro Transit. So the reason that my job exists and the reason that transit agencies across the country focus on transit-oriented development is that transit works better for everyone. When it's easy for you to get to your jobs and your childcare and healthcare services, and when all the destinations that you want to get to are on the way. I think that that's fundamentally a part of envisioning in these station areas so folks can decide what they want their community to be and how they want it to serve them. We focus on providing technical resources and telling this story about how transit-oriented communities can help that. And where we own sites near transit will help guide it through that development process. So that's just a little bit about the work that I do and how I come to this work. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what transit-oriented development is, what are the benefits of transit-oriented, both at the individual but also at the community level, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that we pull together on an annual basis that looks at the development trends that we've seen along these corridors. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what transit-oriented development is, what are the benefits of transit-oriented, both at the individual but also at the community level. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that we pull together on an annual basis that looks at the development trends that we've seen along these corridors. This is going to be the fourth LRT corridor. We're also working on a lot of BRT corridors, and we look at all of the development that we've seen along those. So I'll share some of what we've seen so far. So what is transit-oriented development? What are we talking about when we use the term TOD? So we define it as moderate to high density development served by frequent transit and pedestrian-friendly streets in a neighborhood with a wide mix of uses. That's a pretty generic definition, and it can take a lot of different forms. And I think it's really important for the communities to decide what they want that to look like and what they want and need from those communities. So that's an important piece of this. And it can look a lot of different ways. But really the goal of this, why we talk about this, why we're trying to support it, is giving folks options around how they get around. So they don't just have to drive to get to their destinations. They have options of walking and biking and conveniently taking transit. So that's really at the heart of this. I think it's important to point out that no one project can do all of that. You really have to think about it at the neighborhood level. And it's also not just a transportation problem or a development problem where you really have to consider both of those if you want transit-oriented communities and walkable communities, and what are the benefits at a very high level. I'm going to skim over this. If you have any questions, because I'm talking about this at such a high level, you're welcome to catch me after the fact. I'm happy to talk more about it. So I think that the main point of this slide is that a lot of people want to live in transit-oriented communities. This is actually a survey from the National Association of Realtors. They do this survey on an annual basis to ask people what kinds of communities they want to live in. And what they find over and over again is that over half of Americans want to live or would prefer smaller homes in walkable communities that are served by transit, where they have options of walking to places to shop or places to eat, and where they can easily get to their jobs. Communities. It's not the way our region is built today. But these sorts of transit investments are a helpful way for us to create opportunities for folks like that to have this. A lot with this slide, so I'm going to skim over this one quickly. So that was kind of the demand for it, but there are also a lot of individual benefits, and one of those benefits is better health outcomes. And I think this really just comes down to having the option of walking, biking, and taking transit to your destinations. You're just naturally going to get more exercise as part of that. And transit is an important piece of this. I think there have been some studies that show that folks who are taking transit on a regular basis are over 3 times as likely to get recommended levels of exercise just because they are walking to or from the bus or to or from the train station on a weekly basis. So some good natural outcomes there. There are improved safety outcomes. Part of this comes down to the way we were talking about some of the speed benefits or the safety enhancements that come with these projects. That's part of the reason it's safer to live in transit-oriented communities. Part of it's when you have a lot of people walking and biking and taking transit in an area, people who are driving are more likely to look out for those folks, so they're going to drive more carefully. And part of that just comes down to the inherent safety of different travel modes. But I think the research that we've seen is that people living in transit-oriented communities are 5 times less likely to experience some sort of severe crash over their lifespan. So there are pretty significant benefits from having options of walking and biking and taking transit. There are important economic development benefits. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning, and I'll circle back to this when we talk about the development trends. I think what you're looking at there is the property tax revenue for parcels throughout the region. I think the main point I'll make right now is that about 20% of the property tax revenue that's generated in the region is generated on the 2 to 3% of land within our transit areas. So these transit-oriented communities are really workhorses from a property tax base perspective for our region. There are really important climate benefits. This is some research that came out of Berkeley, and what they find here is that urban infill, which I'll just note if you dig into the definition of that, is really transit-oriented communities. It's new housing or jobs in neighborhoods with existing access to transit infrastructure. That's the single most effective thing that we can do to reduce emissions at a regional level. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that people now have the option of walking, biking, and taking transit, and they don't have to drive. So they take shorter trips or fewer car trips. Lots of other things that we can do on this, but this is a really important part of the equation. And then it also has important equity benefits. Again, I'm just kind of scratching the surface here, but I think one of the really important equity benefits is that it's easier to get to your destinations. I was just looking at all of the jobs near our rapidly expanding high-frequency network, and once the Blue Line and some of the currently planned lines are operating, folks living along the Blue Line are going to have access to 1 in 3 jobs in the region with 1 transfer to a frequent transit line, which is really remarkable. And there was also a study along the Green Line extension that after that corridor opened, folks were far less likely to miss or be late for healthcare appointments because they had access to reliable transportation. And then there are also important housing and transportation affordability benefits. When we look at both housing costs and transportation costs combined, we find that it's far more affordable to live in these transit-oriented communities than communities where you have to drive everywhere, and most of that comes down to savings from transportation, having cheaper alternatives to get around. So that was some of the benefits. Again, just kind of scratch that at the very high level, but now I'm going to shift over to some of the development trends that we've seen in the region. We get a lot of questions about how much development we're seeing near our transit corridors, so we started pulling together a report back in 2017 looking at those trends. Again, I'm going to touch this at a very high level. We also have actually a web application, so if you want to dig into these numbers for yourselves or look at specific corridors, you can do that at metrotransit.org/TOD. Feel free to grab me after the fact if you want to track that down. This is a map from that report. I'll just provide a really quick overview of this. That area in gray is the area in the region that is served by this high-frequency network, either our existing operating lines or our planned corridors. And that's about 3.2% of the region by land area. Since 2009, over 38% of the development in the region, that's multifamily, commercial, public, educational, institutional, industrial, all of those categories has been permitted. And that's about 3.2% of the region by land area. Since 2009, over 38% of the development in the region, that's multifamily, commercial, public, educational, institutional, industrial, all of those categories has been permitted and built within walking distance of this system. And when you look at housing, over 44% of multifamily housing in the region has been built near these corridors. So a huge concentration of new investment and development near these transit corridors. And I'll also mention that we do track the affordable housing. We've broken that out, and we've seen thousands of new affordable housing. I think over half of new affordable housing units are within walking distance, and over 80% of affordable housing units, they're affordable households making 30% of area median. That's roughly the number of households in the city of Bloomington today. That's 26% of regional development on 1% of the land area near our light rail corridors, including the Green Line extension. So we also take a look at this at the corridor level. So this is the Metro Green Line, which entered project development back in 2006. So I think it's a good way to see how these corridors can develop over time. What we've seen is about 26,000 new homes. So I'll just quickly describe this. These are all of the permits that have happened along that corridor since 2009. Yellow is new multifamily development. Purple development back in 2006. So I think it's a good way to see how these corridors can develop over time. What we've seen is about 26,000 new homes. So I'll just quickly describe this. These are all of the permits that have happened along that corridor since 2009. Yellow is new multifamily development. Purple is industrial, blue is public and institutional, and red is commercial development. We just kind of lump it into those categories to make it easier to read. We've seen about 26,000 new homes built along that corridor going back to 2009, a total of just shy of $10 billion in investment. And those neighborhoods have taken a really strong role in deciding what they wanted that development to be and how they wanted it to meet their needs. And I think that's an important part of this overall conversation. And then there's a lot more that's planned along this corridor too. So this doesn't happen overnight. I think that's an important part of the story. It happens gradually, and it needs to be driven by the visions for development in these areas. So yeah, that's all of the development along the Metro Green Line going back to 2009. When I get those questions, I also get some questions around what does this mean from a tax base perspective? As I mentioned, these corridors, transit corridors, are really a workhorse for tax base in the region, particularly that new development that's happening. I think it's fair to say that it's getting more expensive to provide, to maintain infrastructure and provide services. And when communities don't have new development, all of the increase in costs fall on existing businesses and households. And TOD can help defray some of those costs and carry some of that burden. So what you're looking at here is the tax base for the Metro Green Line back in 2006 when it was entering that project development phase. You can see downtown Minneapolis on the left, and then downtown St. Paul on the right. Parcels in green, dark green, are generating around $15,000 per acre in property tax revenue, and parcels in dark purple are generating over $1 million in property tax revenue. And what you can quickly see is all of those purple columns are new developments that have popped up along that corridor, and they're generating a lot of revenue for those communities, and again, shouldering some of the burden of maintaining infrastructure and providing and paying for those services that everybody along that corridor wants. So we took a quick look at this, and I mean, you're probably familiar with the fact that commercial values in downtowns have gone down significantly. Despite that, all of the new investment that's happened in that corridor. And then it's also just a lot more job opportunities, more child care opportunities, more grocery stores that everybody can access.
Is that true? And so I can wait till questions.
Sure. Yeah, this is, I don't know how we are on time. I think so that was the end of my presentation, and if we have time for questions, I'm happy to answer that now. Otherwise, yeah. Sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, my question is you just said and more grocery stores.
Yes.
And when I look along the Green Line in St. Paul, what I see is actually the loss of grocery stores and limited access to food for folks who live and work along the corridor.
Sure.
So I'm not trying to refute the data. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to understand that particular comment.
Sure, yeah, so I was thinking, I mean, when we look at the system as a whole, we can pull up the Green Line as a specific example. One of the new grocery stores is the Fresh Time, and you see folks getting on the station there near the university. It's not going to be even across the board, and I think that's a really important point.
I think the loss of businesses along the corridor is that
Yeah.
there's a cautionary tale inside of this that I think the Blue Line wants to learn from.
Sure.
What happened in the Green Line, no more, we lost Cub, we lost Walmart, even in downtown St. Paul, Lund's is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So the major, larger grocery stores along the Green Line, Fresh Time is great, but it's small and anchored near the university. So just a cautionary tale for us to
Absolutely, yeah.
consider for the Blue Line.
This is not my presentation, but I am jumping up at this portion because I feel very passionate about this because we've, of course, lost grocery stores along this corridor already. both in District 1 and District 2 for the county. So from a tax-based perspective, this is favorable in District 1 and District 2 for the county. So from a tax-based perspective, this is favorable in that there are more funds from property taxes that can be, right, that's the taxes, the government word for revenue. So that's for our schools, for our parks, for our roads. The cautionary tale is absolutely why anti-displacement and a real criticality of the presentations that are here, because there's always more data that is needed. The fact that we this project, and so this is not my project. I just wanted to, not my presentation, but I did want to make some connections around there are favorable aspects with an asterisk on it. Only if it works for everyone. And there are many creative tools where revenue can be generated and directed towards specific uses. Since I happen to be on the mic, and I don't intend to be on the mic again, I do want to shout out Representative Freiberg, who's here, who represents Golden Valley, Crystal, Robbinsdale, and Plymouth. So we're not on that portion of the Blue Line corridor now, and I'm looking to see if there's any other electeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fernando.